everybody, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and today we've got a bit of a different video. We're going to do a pattern adjustment video. I know that if you've been following me along for a while, you'll have known that I made Bramble Bear, which is one of the larger friends from Luna Lapin, and then we made her schoolhouse, is it schoolhouse or schoolroom dress? One of those two, old school dress, I'll put that way, with this lovely collar. But we found that, like a lot of people who've made this, that it's really tight on the sleeves, and actually that actually compresses some of the boucle there that's been used to make Bramble's arms. So we're gonna I've got to make another dress today because I've had a request from a friend for a dress and a bear to gift to somebody. So I thought that while I was altering the pattern for the sleeves, I'd show you what pattern adjustments I'm making, and then I'll make the dress from those pattern adjustments, and we'll see if it works. It should do. And I've just watched a sleeve fitting video on the I don't know if people know, but I'm an ambassador for Cashmere Patterns, and as part of that I've been gifted access to their all access club, which is great. And Jenny Rushmore, who's the designer at Cashmere Patterns, I know I'm digressing but it's relevant, has just recently put out this month, which is July 2023, has put out a fit class on sleeves adjustment. So I thought I knew what I wanted to make anyway, and she's just confirmed really what I needed to do, and the only thing that I was just adjusting the sleeve cap at the top, which is included in there. So we're going to have a go at following along with what Jenny suggested, and although it's for a friend, for our Bramble here, the adjustments are pretty much the same anyway if you were doing it for an adult or a child as well. So pattern adjustments are pattern adjustments, and they're just really good to know. So this is the dress that we're comparing to, where we've got these really tight sleeves and there's not much room in there. And if you can see around the back as well, that arm is really tightly, if I lift the collar up, that arm is really tightly into that sleeve without much give or much movement. So that's what we're looking to adjust, just to make it easier, because if you gifted this to a child and the child wanted to dress and undress the character, then these sleeves are really fiddly to get in. You really have to do some pulling and tugging, and that could be difficult for your arm joints. So I'm going to, I'll insert a picture just next, or a little bit of spiel about, and show you the dress afterwards to show you how it looks afterwards, and then you don't have to watch all of the video if you don't want to, if it doesn't achieve what you want. That way then I'll jump into the pattern adjustments. And apologies here, it's extremely hot and steamy here in southern Spain, so I've got the aircon on, and I'm a little bit underdressed I suppose for videoing, but I hope you'll forgive me because it is just really hot, and I just wanted to capture this while I was making it rather than go and get changed and do my makeup and do everything else. And I thought, you know what we're doing, so you know you're here for the stitching, not for how I look. So let me just get on with this, and we'll have a look at making Bramble a little more comfy in her dress. We can't alter this one, we can only alter future ones, just to make that clear. So if you've already made one, then you're stuck with that, unless you've got enough fabric just to do a new pair of sleeves, and you might be able to unpick and then put some new sleeves in again. But anyway, let me show you, because I've got another Bramble here. So we have two Brambles. So this is the one that I'm going to be dressing, and the other thing as well, which I've done with this Bramble, is I have made, it's going to be a her, the legs 1.5 inches shorter. So again, I don't think that impedes with the look of the bear at all, but it does mean that I have managed to get 2 Brambles out of 1/2 metre of the boucle fabric. So that, if that's relevant as well, I just thought I'd mention that. Right, I'll stop waffling and we'll get on. Okay, so I've just popped back just to show you the finished dress with the alteration. I hope you can see that there's more room in the cuff just here. I can actually get my finger in there, and there's more room along the edge of the sleeve here, and then we've got this just little delightful little gather at the top here. So if that's the kind of effect that you were hoping for your sleeves on Bramble, then carry on watching the video, because you're going to see how I've altered the pattern in order to make these changes so that the sleeves for the Bramble's dress are not quite so tight on there. Okay, so if we just take a quick moment to have a look at Bramble's dress here, I can see that it's not too bad under the underarm just here, but it's still quite tight. So on the bodice underarm, it's not too tight there. There's plenty of room on the width, but the scoop of the arm side needs to be slightly more, because there's not much room under the underarm. Likewise, along the length of the sleeve, there's not much. So we're going to estimate how much we're going to add in here. So I think if I add 1/2 inch front and back at the underarm, and then I'm going to add in a whole inch at the centre of the top of the arm, because that's 1/2 inch front and back, that'll account for that. I might even add a bit more to make the sleeves a little bit more kind of gathered at the top, but I'm also going to add a little bit extra in the cuff, because I think that that needs a little bit extra as well. So probably 1/2 inch at the cuff. So that's the thing that we need to kind of make sure that we are incorporating. So let's split our pattern pieces up. The skirt I'm not altering at all, other than I have folded it up for Bramble to the higher length. There's 2 cut lines, one for Luna, who has, also for Flora, who has longer legs, and one for Bramble. So I've just folded this over and just pinned it up by the required amount. And even though my second Bramble, which is having the dress made for it, has got slightly shorter legs than the original, I still think the longer dress looks nice, so I'm going to keep with that. If I feel once it's made that there's a problem with the length, then I can always add an extra, turn the hem up a little bit more. So we're not going to, other than folding up that length for Bramble, which we would do anyway, I'm not making any alterations to the skirt. Likewise, we won't be altering the neck, so the collar will stay the same. So I'm trying to minimise the impact of these changes. Let me just put a light on. Trying to minimise impact of these changes. So because I'm not altering the top of the bodice just here on the top shoulder sleeve seam, or the front of the dress at the front here, then that collar there will all still be intact. So that's going to stay the same too. So the pieces that you actually need to change are going to be the back bodice, which is the one that's cut on the fold, the front bodice with the V front to it, and there's our arm side, and then the sleeve as well. So to do that, we're going to need those 3 pattern pieces. You're going to need some spare tissue paper. You can use coloured if you want to, and then I'm going to get some pens and pencils, because I'll need to put some colour into mine so that you can see what's happening. But if you're doing it yourself, you can just do ordinary felt tip pencil, it'll all be fine. Okay, so let's just now do the sleeve first, and then we'll adjust the bodices to match the sleeve once we've finished. So let me put my bodice pieces just to one side, but we will change those. Likewise, on this dress, I'm not going to use a facing. I'm going to fully line the inside of my dress. So when I'm going to I'm going to discard for now the facing pieces, and I will cut out, once I've adjusted it, a second front bodice and a second set of back bodice, those 2 pattern pieces, in a lining fabric, so that they can go inside the dress, which will give a much neater finish, because the original ones have got a facing. Let me just have a look here. Just show you in the centre of Bramble's dress here. So we've got a facing down the front here, which is this extra bit here, and around the back, but you can see all of the gathers and all the inside workings of your seams, and I think we can get a much neater finish with that once we do our front. So that's the plan. Okay, so bear with me while we just get on and do this. Okay, so in addition to my pattern piece and my tissue paper that we're going to be working with, I've also got a ruler. I'm just using a quilting ruler, but you can use any ruler. I've got another one with seam allowances on it, my seam gauge, which I like to use, coloured pencils, and my scissors. Okay, so we're going to take our pattern piece for our sleeve, and you'll see there's a line with a double-edged arrow on it, and that's our grain line. The first thing you're going to do is extend that line down and up to the hem and also to the top of the arm. Just run your ruler along the edge, and you'll be able to get that same line. The next thing you're going to do then is take your pencil and do 2 lines across it like that, so dissecting it, okay? So just 2 lines, because we need those later on to reference it. The next thing you're going to do then is you're going to cut up from the hem all the way through the pattern and right up to the top of the arm side. The sleeve cap, isn't it? Okay, so you'll end up with 2 pattern pieces, both pretty much half a sleeve or just under. Okay, we're going to draw a line down the middle of your tissue paper, And I'm going to make mine 2 inches apart because I want it to be 2 inches at the top. And I'm going to just make a little mark that's 1/2 inch as well because I want to come down to 1/2 inch at the hem. So I've got 2 parallel lines down here, and then I've just marked in 1/2 inch just at the bottom there. So then what I'm going to do then is I'm going to put down one piece of my sleeve pattern down. I'm using the right side first, and I'm just doing it so that the hem is at the bottom where my line is for my 1/2 inch, and then it's just running all the way up the top of that drawn line that I did, the first one on the right hand side, and sticking that down. So we've got one piece of the sleeve stuck down onto the tissue paper, a line that's 2 inches across here and down, but then only 1/2 inch at the bottom. Then what I'm going to do is extend out these 2 lines that we drew across, the 2 parallel lines that we did that just dissected. I'm just going to draw those in as going straight across that gap of those 2 inches. Can you see? So here's the where the little drawn line was that I did down the centre. And if we put those 2 together, you can see that that's exactly where those lines are, because I want to slash and spread those. So what I'm going to do then is line up the bottom of the left hand piece of the pattern with the 1/2 inch point, because I want to add 1/2 inch here, but I'm angling it so that the top of the sleeve hits where the 2 inch mark was, which opens that out. I'm going to put my scissors on there just to hold it for a second while I tape that in place. So we've got a wedge that's being added into the sleeve. That's 2 inches at the top and 1/2 inch at the bottom of the sleeve. Now, so I've marked up, so I've made sure that these lines here as well are hitting those lines across there to make sure that those are at the same point again. The next thing that I'm going to do, I'll use a coloured pencil just to be able to, so you can see it, is I'm going to go to the bottom of the hem, and I'm going to go to the 2 outside edges of the hem, and I'm going to draw a line straight across them there, because if you can see, I'll just tape this down. Lots of tape needed when you're doing pattern alterations. Sorry for the noise, but it's unavoidable. So that's those down. So down here, the green line is the new hemline that I've just drawn in. That's how the hemline went when I put the slashed, so cut and then spread open to add the extra in. That's what's happened with that hemline. And then if you look at the top here as well, we've got a curve here that's got a gap in it. So again, you can either freehand it, or being as I've got a seam gauge, I'm going to use that. And I'm going to just find a curve that looks nice against both of those 2 points. It is taking it slightly higher, but I don't mind about that. And I'm drawing that in to join those 2 edges together. So that's how it looks at the top with the green there. And just here, that's where it ended, the original sleeve. That's 2 inches apart just there, and I've drawn a top of a sleeve cap in there. And then that's where the 1/2 inch has been added on the base, and I've just drawn in my my flat cuff seam there. So now all we do is we cut out our new pattern, well, this amended pattern piece. I'm hoping it adds a little bit more gathering into the top of the sleeve cap, because I'm happy with that design aesthetic. So that's our new sleeve pattern now with the extra room in. And if we take that to Bramble and just put that in, remember there's seam allowance top and bottom, and put that around her arm, even with 1/2 inch seam allowance, there's a lot more fabric in there for her, not 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch seam allowance taken off. That sleeve should now move on and off quite nicely. If we find it doesn't, then in future iterations I'll add more, but I know at least for this one we've added in that extra, and that should be better on this dress. This is the theory. So now I'm going to go to cutting out my fabric. I'm going to use this lovely pink one, which is what my friend has chosen. And we're going to do that. Then the lining will be in a plain pink so that we can see the difference, and I'll just show you how to fully line it. But the main construction bits will be the same as the schoolroom dress video that I've done. This is just kind of like a quick and dirty video trying to show you how to alter that sleeve pattern and add more room in, and then how it looks on the finished dress. Okay, back in a minute when I've tidied up and I've cut out. Okay, so just so you can catch up with me, this is my bodice front, and it has and back, and it's been sewn together at the shoulder seams as normal, and I've attached attached the collar onto there, making sure the points started and finished at the same point on the centre front, so that when we put the buttons on they're equal. Oops, which way am I going? That way. Okay. I've also, with my lining pieces, which I'm using this stripy fabric for, joined those at the shoulder seams as well. And what happens now is that you've got your collar basted on as you would do, that's the normal step, but you now put your bodice piece right side down, so you've got your right side onto the right side of your other bodice piece, and then you just pin it along the front, because we're actually going to sew it from this bottom corner up to this corner just here. Make sure they all match up, and then underneath your shoulder seams should match as well, which is what we want, and your rest of your bodice down here should match as well. So you're basically going to sew your bodice on all the way around the neck like you would have done the facing. And then we've done that, we're going to turn that round and we're going to understitch around that neck edge as well, just to hold that all together. So we've got our collar on with our lining. So as you can see, the lining, which is the pink and white stripe, mirrors absolutely the right side of the fabric. So all except for the collar. Obviously the collar's been double-sided in the same fabric as the main outside of the dress. Obviously you could do that in a contrast if you wanted to, it's up to you. So that's all been pressed, and I've also understitched as well. So I've done that row of stitching where you separate out the two edges and you put all the seam allowances towards the lining, and then you just understitch, and it just stops the lining from rolling out onto the other side. So now we're going to be working with our sleeves, and I'm going to put our sleeves in the flat, because I think that's much easier when we're dealing with such small pieces like these. So I'll get the sleeves ready and prepared, and then I'll show you what I've done with those, but that's what I wanted just to show you with the lining of the bodice, how that should be looking. Okay, so across the top of the sleeves I've just run 2 rows of gathering stitches. I've let down my tension down to number 2, and I've taken my stitch length up to number 4, because that'll allow us to gather the threads up. And then if you use your bobbin threads, they usually gather up the best. That was on my right side because I had my wrong side up. Hold on to your 2 threads together, just so separate them out so you've got the 2 threads from the same side. And then if you hold on to those and then just run your fingers along the threads, you'll just gather up these sleeve caps ready for putting them in. So just separate out again those 2 for the right side, because obviously you've got 4 threads, haven't you, at each end if you've done 2 rows. And they're only about 1/4 inch apart from each other, these 2 rows are, but it's just 2 rows gives you a much more stable gather. Okay, so there's our sleeve cap gathered there, and I've done that on both of them, because then what we're going to do then is make sure you've got your notches on your sleeves as well, because you need your front and your back to be right. So that's the front. So let me work out which way round this is going to go so I get angularly challenged. So that's front and that's front. So keeping your collar out of the way. Your notches are not going to match because we've extended the sleeve curve, so just to let you know that that's not going to match, but pin the top and the bottom together once you know which is, so use your notches to identify which is the right side, the front of your sleeve, and which is the back. So 1 notch is the front and 2 notches are always the back. Get the right place, Claire. So the sleeve underarm matches the underarm on the bodice. And your notches are going to be roughly the same place, but not too far. And we don't put any, I've only put the gathering stitches between the notches as well. So you can pin the underarm flat, because you don't generally have any gathering at the underarm point. And then we're just going to move these gathers now, just to make them nice and even, so they just match in with the top of the sleeve head. So you might have to gather them a bit tighter or a bit narrower, depending on, where's my gathering threads gone? They're inside here. Can you tell I'm in a hurry? Right, slow down, Claire. Because if, in my experience, if you end up hurrying, you will just end up using the seam ripper more. So gathering threads from that side. That's one from this side. That's one from this side. There they are. Right. So pulling on those now, we're going to just shorten this gathered edge until it fits into the sleeve cap just nicely. Just make sure your gathers are nice and even, but you want most of them towards the top because that's where mostly your gathers are, aren't they, if you have a nice gathered sleeve. And then just put your pins in just to mark where you are. Make those nice and even as much as possible. And because we've extended the sleeve cap slightly, you've got slightly more gathers at the top of the sleeve, but I'm hoping that's going to look quite nice when we actually come to sew this. So that's the sleeve pinned in. I always put my pins in towards the arm side because then when we're actually stitching, it means that it doesn't matter whether I stitch from the top or the bottom, I can take those pins out as I go. And then we're going to start at one underarm and then we're going to go over the top here and finish at the other arm with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And that's going to give us our fuller sleeve, which with the extra gathers, and the collar will still sit on the top of that arm side collar because we've not changed that, but that's how it's going to be. So let me just take this to machine and sew these both in, and then I'll come back to you and show you what we do next, because we need to do something different with the lining and we need to do the skirt as well. But the skirt is all the same as you do for this schoolroom skirt, apart from the front edge. Because we've got this lining rather than a facing, we need to do something different to the front edge, but I'll show you how to do that. Okay, back in a minute. Okay, so here we go with our, both sleeves now are in. So there's one sleeve, and I've just pressed up, done a double hem, up 1/4 of an inch, and then up 1/4 of an inch again on the hem, but I've not stitched that yet. And done that on both sides. Both sleeves are in with the gathers, and I've also pressed up just approximately 1 centimetre on the back of the lining, and also on the front only of the linings, but I've not pressed the front of the bodice up at all. So the next thing you're going to do now is, on your fronts only, is you're going to take the two underarm points of your sleeve and you're going to match those up together first and put a pin in. Then match the hem together on the bottom of your bodice and put a pin in. And then go to unravel your sleeve where you've just ironed it up, because you should have a crease there still, but you need the crease, but you need to have your sleeve ironed out, folded out, and then we're just going to put a pin down there. Put as many as you need just to keep that together, and we're just going to stitch down there. We're going to pivot at the underarm point and then come down to this point here again. So I'll just do that on both sides and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so there's the underarm seams on that one done, and on this one they're inside out at the moment. Just go down and just underarm, just neaten the edges on that underarm. You don't need to do it on the bodice, just on the sleeves, so that they don't fray, because they're not cut on the bias. So I'm just going to zigzag those just to make those neatened, and I'll come back to you. But I'm just going to fold over the hem like I said, fold it over once, fold it over twice, and then I'm just going to stitch that in the round as well, and that will sort that out, and then we'll be on to sorting out the lining. Okay, so I've just done the hems on the cuffs, and also don't forget to do the little snip into the seam allowance under the arms as well. So just at that point where the underarm is and the bodice, because you need to release that so that the underarm can release. I've not sewn my lining yet, so that's still looking a little bit messy, but I just thought we'd do a quick try on to just have a look and see how this looks now. So you still have to pull Bramble's arm through by putting your hand in, just like you would a child's dress, but I can already tell that that's much looser. You could possibly even add more width in if you wanted to, but I think this Bramble's quite well stuffed. this new one. I probably ought to put it onto the other one really, oughtn't I? And then we could see the difference on the same bramble, but I can see there's more room here in the dress, and there's more room just at the cuff as we wanted, so that arm isn't being compressed anymore. There's more gathers on the top of the sleeve, but I quite like that. That was the whole idea, and it's fitting okay everywhere else. So we know we can carry on knowing that we've done the right thing, because if this didn't fit now, then we'd be better off just stopping and then cutting some more sleeves and with a bit more room in, just to make that work. But I can see that that's all going to look nice once that's all finished and the collar's down and what have you. So we're going to carry on. So next thing we're going to carry on with is the lining, because we just need to neaten that up slightly. Just hold on to Bramble's arms while you take the dress off, because it's still close fitting, so you could add more room in if you wanted to, but I think it's enough aesthetically. It's that balance between aesthetically having enough room and then not looking too baggy. So the first thing we're going to do is on the underarm here, we're going to sew just one line just through stay stitching, just 1/4 of an inch along from the edge, because that will tell us how much we can turn it in when we neaten the edge. So we're going to do that stitch first. Then when we've done that, we're then going to put the bodice underarm seams together like that, and we're just going to sew down there again with our 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and we're going to do that on both sides, and that will then finish off the bodice. And then we're on to the skirt. So then you're going to put your gathering stitches in, and make sure you mark your notches on your skirt. Then you're going to put your gathering stitches around the top like you would do anyway. You have to do something with the front placket, and we have to fold that in first as well. So you're going to follow all of those steps until we get to attaching the skirt. The other thing that I do as well first is I do the hem first before I gather up anything on the skirt, just because I think it makes it easier when it's flat before you've got all of those gathers in. So I'll be doing all of that and jumping ahead. Of course, this video is assuming that you've made the dress before, or that you've watched the other video first on how to construct the dress. So this is just following these pattern changes, and if you've seen enough, then that's fine. Just remember, because you've not got a facing on the front of this bodice, you've got it fully lined, you need to just fold over the facing first and make sure that your gathers start, your gathers start right into the corner there. So that's your collar there that's folding back just here, and that's the front of your bodice. Your skirt needs to be folded and fit right in there, because you can't have it. They get you, on the original one, they get you to fold out the facing and then start there to sew it, and you haven't got a facing on here because you've got it fully lined. So that's just the difference that you need to do there. I hope that all makes sense. I'll show you when I get to that part anyway. Okay, morning everybody. We're on a brand new day. Still as hot and steamy here in Spain. But we've got Bramble's bodice finished, bodice and collar finished yesterday with the new sleeves that we've put in. We put the cuffs around the hem just by doing a double turn on that, and then this is the inside of the dress now. As you can see, we've got that stripy lining instead of the facings. So I just wanted to just confirm what I'd done with that. So we've attached it as normal as you would do with the facings, and then I went round and just marked where the seam allowance is on the arm side, just so that we know where we can turn up to, because eventually when we neaten this off, we will turn that edge in and stitch it to the sewn line for the sleeve, and that will then make that really nice and neat inside. So that's what we'll do later. I've also turned up about 1 centimetre on the hem there, which will be the same as the seam allowance I use attaching the skirt. And I've also sewn and then pressed open the seam allowances on the side of the bodice. So really you're just mimicking the bodice, but without, so the main bodice, the fashion fabric bodice, but without the sleeves in. And I don't ever line the sleeves, so they're not lined. And the collar's all sitting all lovely. So that was the bodice, that got all of that finished. And that's now waiting for its skirt. So let's pop that to one side. So with the skirt, you're gonna need to follow the video for the old schoolroom dress, which is what we're making, but on the main video that I made at first, because I've still neatened the edge and turned back the placket on both sides of the skirt, on the left and the right. So those have been neatened. I've already turned up my hem and hemmed that as well, just done a double turn on the top and then just stitched that down nice and neatly. I also mitered the corners again on the corners of the skirt at the bottom hem, so that that's going to sit nicely and look all lovely when that's all pressed and finished. So the next thing that I've done then is I've made sure that I've marked my notches, and I made sure I got one at the centre back, and I did add a little notch at the centre back of the bodice as well, which will make that easier for when we're doing this later. And I've also added my 2 rows of stitching there on a loose tension. I took my tension down to a 2 and I took my stitch length up to a 4. And then what we'll be able to do with this now is we'll be able to pull on the threads that were for the bobbin, because they're the easier ones. You have to just separate out, because you've got, for each row of stitching, you've got 2 threads. So you want to have the 2 top threads or the 2 bottom threads, whichever one you use for your bobbin. If you hold on to those and then pull with your fingers, that it'll start to gather up. Now, on the main dress, because there's a facing on the front of the bodice here, and there's a facing on the front here, you have to leave a bit without any gathers on it, and you open out the facings for when you attach it. But because we've fully lined this bodice, we don't have that facing on the front to attach to. So I'm taking my gathers all the way up to the edges on the 2 sides, and then I'm gathering this skirt then into the middle from both edges, because that will just then make it sit right when we come to do it. So just loosely gather it up just to get yourself started, because that's always easier on each thing. And then when I've got mine gathered, I'm then going to pin it to my front, matching my, to my bodice, matching the notches, first at the centre back and then at the edges. And I just want to show you what I'm going to do at the edges so that you know too, because obviously I've changed this slightly with fully lining the bodice. So let me just put some gathers into the middle. Right, okay. So get your bodice, and you want the bodice upside down and on your right side, because you're going to put the right side of your skirt against the right side of your bodice. And then we've got to just find where our notches are. So that's about the centre back one, I believe. So let's just match that up together. Oh, where's my notch gone? There it is. And put your pin in. Just avoiding your gathering threads, you don't want to be pinning those in. Then look for the next notch, which will be on the side seam. There's mine. So let's match that one up as well, so that's at the right place. And by not matching these notches, you make sure that your gathers are equal all the way around your dress, so that you've not got too many gathers in one place and not enough in another. There's a last notch, and then just offer that up to the bodice, and then let's just pop a pin in there just to hold that together. Okay, so at the moment the 2 ends are free. Now we're going to go to the end and we're going to open it up so that you can see the transition between the lining and the main skirt. And then this is really, really important. You need to match up the lining so that it's right on that stitch line between the 2, not on the understitching, just there, but where the actual seam line is. Make sure you see your you've got a little ridge there where you've pushed your your seam allowance into your bodice lining, and that's fine, but get that right up close into that section there. And if you have just a couple of millimeters of no gathers at all, that's absolutely fine, and put your pin in once you're ready it's there, because what's going to happen is we've got to fold this will fold in, and then that lining will fold round to encase it completely like that. Did you see what I did? So pretend we've stitched that. I've turned it up on the stitch line. My lining is already folded up and got that memory in from the ironing mark. But look, it's folding straight onto there, and you should transition then from the skirt to the bodice the same way as you had done if the lining was out and was open. But I've attached my placket front, if you like, into my gathering stitches. So that's all going to be gathered at the same time. I hope that makes sense. So yes, that's what I've done. So now what I'm going to do is do the same at the other side. Keep our gathering threads out the way. So lie it right along that very edge, and then put a pin in to hold that really still. And then we just carry on with the skirt as normal now. So you're just going to gather to make sure that you've got enough gathers between each of your notches and that your skirt edge matches your bodice edge. And then we're going to pin it in place in several places, and then make sure that all of those gathers are sitting nice and beautifully. And just keep tugging your skirt down by holding your gathers at the top and tugging it down, and that'll make sure that no gathers get folded underneath. And your bodice edge needs to be pucker free. So once you've pinned everything, just have a quick look and make sure you've got no puckers on your bodice edge, and that's all going to sit nicely. Okay, so here we are. We've got our skirt now attached, and I've taken out my gathering threads, and you'll just be picking out little fray threads just for a little while, but just keep your eye out for those as you're going along. The next thing that we're going to do then is move on to neatening off the bodice lining, and this is something that you might not have done before, but all we do is fold it back. I've got the seam allowance pressed open, and fold back on the side seam and pop that on top of this side seam. Just keep having a look backwards and forwards just to try and make it as neat as possible, because the neater it is at the moment, then the easier it'll be to sew. Go to the front here, and then your seam allowances will be pressed into on the bodice, will be pressed into the bodice anyway. Just make your fold there, tuck up the end on the bottom, and then you're just going to put a pin along there just to hold that still. And you're matching it up to the sewn line where you've sewn the skirt onto the bodice. I've just got a little bit of gathering thread there. And you will just be picking out threads just for a little while, but that's okay, that's part of sewing, isn't it? Let's come to the other side, and then we're going to match up our side seam here with our side seam there. And you're trying to match up the stitch lines, and then just lay it over where the actual sewn line has been for the attaching the skirt. And then back to the front here, just push all those seam allowances up, and it'll all fold nicely because you've got that memory in the ironed line that you did. And if you need to just adjust it at the side seams, you can do, just to get that sitting nice and flat. But it should pretty much, if you've done the same seam allowances all the way through, and that's why it's important to have the same seam allowances, and I use 1/4 inch on mine, then that's all going to sit in there. We can tuck that in. And then on the back of the skirt, we're just going to pretty much do the same thing. It should just lay over the top of that stitch line really nicely, and then we just pin it down. And then you can machine sew it, but I have never ever managed to get a neat enough finish if I machine sew this. So I just do a slip stitch, and I use the stitching line of the skirt, and I use that as my guide, and I just rest the edge of the folded bodice against it, and then I just stitch along that line, almost using those stitches to gather it, not to gather it, to attach it, and then that just goes straight onto the edge just here. So that will then give you a lovely neat finish along the back, along here. With the shoulders, the arm size, you're going to need to snip in at a 1/4 inch, not 1/4 inch, up to but not through your stay stitching around that arm side. So just keep going around doing that. And then what we're going to do with these is, I'll just finish doing this one. Just be careful that if you feel any resistance, just be careful, because you shouldn't feel any resistance to your snips, because you should only be going through one layer of fabric. So if you feel any resistance, it could be that you've got more than you are bargaining for tied up on the other side of your thing. You can then take this to the ironing board if you want to, or you can finger press it, and I just use the stitch line, and my hands are nice and hot and steamy here in Spain at the moment, so that's folding under quite nicely. And I'm just running my fingernails across that stitch line and tucking in those snips that I've just done, those clipped edges. Because then what you can do is you then fold the seam allowance of your sleeve, which is this bit here, fold that in towards your bodice, and you're going to do the same thing. So that folded edge goes against the stitched edge that was for the sleeve, and then you just put a pin in just to hold it together. And I usually get these bits prepped, and then I'll save it for a bit of TV or what have you, and then you can then just do your hand stitching just around that edge. And what this will do is it'll just neaten off the inside of the bodice really beautifully. And this is how I do some of my dressmaking as well when I'm making for children or for adults as well. Make sure your shoulder seam of your lining matches the shoulder seam of your outer bodice as well. You'll get the idea. So can you see how once that's stitched round, that'll be lovely and neat, and all of your threads and all of your fraying is all on the inside, and that'll give you a lovely neat finish on the inside of your bodice. Then once you've hand stitched around there and hand stitched around the arm side, then you just want to sorting out your buttons and your buttonholes, both of which are covered in the main video, and then you're done. So what I'll do is I'll get those bits done, I'll get my buttons sewn on. I'm not going to repeat those processes here because you can flick back into the other video and have a look at that. And let me just work out, so right over left, isn't it? So it has to be that way. And then that will give us a lovely, lovely dress all finished with the fully lined bodice and with the sleeves extended. Okay, so the second dress is all finished now. That's all got lovely little heart buttons on it down the front there. I've done all the buttonholes. These ones I've done horizontally rather than vertically, and obviously you can decide which you prefer best. The only one that I really struggle with is this one just here, which is right on top of the waist there, and that's because you've got the bulk of the gathering here underneath this waist point. And whether you start there and then travel up might be slightly easier, so just bear in mind that if you're looking at these two dresses, then one has the buttonholes going vertically and the other one has the buttonholes going horizontally. So this pink dress has got the larger arm side and also larger sleeve, and it's also got some more gathers in the top of the sleeve there. And what I'm going to do a true comparison is I'm going to, if we look at this was the original pattern for Bramble, and this is sewn with the 1/4 inch seam allowance down the side of the sleeves and down the side of the bodice and around the arm side. So if I just undo this Bramble and then just pop the dress on the same one, then you'll be able to see that the difference between the two fits, because I think it's better, because I think the other one's got slightly bigger arms. I've just stuffed them slightly more, I think, and then that will then hopefully be a better comparison for you just to see how these fit. So you still have to just put your fingers inside to grab hold of the hand and pull that up and on. I can already tell that that's going on much easier than the other one did. Come on, Bramble, let's get you dressed. So let's do the buttons and then get her all ready, and then we'll be able to have a look at this properly. Bear with me just a second. I think it just shows you can make these dresses in a variety of fabrics. I know the original one was made in red and white gingham, but I think that these floral ones still look just as beautiful. Right, okay, just have to settle you down a bit. Yeah, so you can see on there, look, there's so much more room in there. Also, you can just fluff up the top of the sleeves just to give that little bit of gather. Just pull the sleeve down slightly, Bramble, there we go. And the collar sits just lovely up to that neck edge as well, that shoulder edge. And that is, so there's a lot more room here at the cuff and all the way along that sleeve to make it just sit a little bit better and not look quite so tight. So I'm really pleased with the dress and with the alterations. You can now go ahead and make that with confidence, that you know that that's actually going to work. And I hope you approve. I'm not going to turn the screen around today because, as I say, it's really hot and sticky here in Spain, so I hope you'll forgive not seeing my face at the end of the video, but hopefully you enjoy this. I do think I'm going to make a bow for the hair now, so I'm going to do a separate video for that, and that should be a quite quick and easy one, just so that if you wanted to finish this off, then you could do. You could also add a sash if you wanted to around the waist and tie that either at the front or at the back. But yeah, that's going to make that makes a huge difference to the sleeve on Bramble, and I'm really pleased that those alterations have worked. So I hope you've enjoyed sewing along with me today, and on behalf of Bramble and I, we're going to say thank you very much for watching, and we hope that you've enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to subscribe, then we'd really appreciate you joining along with us. Keep your eye out for more videos, folks, because there'll be more coming. Take care, have a great day, and happy stitching, everybody. Bye.